sports fans, welcome to episode 6 of the Student Section Summer League podcast. I'm your host, Dom Taylor, along with my co-hosts, Cooper Husky and Dylan Morgan. Guys, how are we doing today?
Doing great.
Feeling fantastic. Happy 4th of July.
Yes, happy 4th of July, even though it's the 5th.
Belated, yes.
Right.
Happy 5th
Belated
of July.
4th of July. Yeah. You know what? It's never too late to celebrate the 4th of July, right? You know, you can, like my neighborhood where people just randomly shoot off fireworks at random points during the year, you know, like, of course, It's never too late to celebrate the 4th of July. It gets pretty annoying, but whatever, you know, it is what it is. We have a lot of topics to cover today. We're going to be getting into real quickly just the MLB schedule. They're going to release it tomorrow. There's some players that have opted out since the last time that we had this podcast. And then we're going to get into the Washington Redskins and some of the controversy there. They're thinking about changing their name. And then along with that, we're going to be talking about the HBCUs, the historically black college and universities, and some of their the movement, I guess you could say, with basketball recruits as they're thinking about possibly changing their commitments to HBCUs to support them in their athletic departments. And then finally, we're going to finish the last round of the CFB all-time team debate. Guys, we're finally down to 2 teams. We're going to see just how this tournament ends up. But first off, of course, let's get into baseball. So I know we've kind of been beating the dead horse. There are a lot of stuff we've been talking about with baseball, but just real briefly, the MLB is expected to announce the new 2020 regular season schedule on Monday. And that, you know, there's been a lot of players that are opting out. They're not happy with how this thing has been handled, of course. I don't blame him. It's been a complete cluster, but some of those players include David Price, pitcher for the Dodgers, Ryan Zimmerman, first baseman for the Nationals. You've got Joe Ross, pitcher for the Nationals. You've got Mike Leake, pitcher for the Diamondbacks. You've got Ian Desmond, the first baseman for the Rockies. I mean, you know, we got tons of pretty high-profile guys that are calling out this year. You know, I guess I'm not surprised. You know, but it kind of confirms in my mind that I guess it wasn't about the money, because clearly they're doing fine and they can afford to just not play a season. But it's more about not wanting to be oppressed by the owners. Guys, what are your reactions to what's going on with all the guys dropping out of the season?
I think it's interesting. We're seeing this dynamic in not only the MLB but the NBA right now as well, as they're gearing up for practices and such. So it's going to be interesting to see the beginning of the year how some of these teams are going to have to adjust to not having some of their top talent. Just like the Nationals, they're trying to defend a title right now, and now they are down their first baseman and one of their bullpen guys who has been solid for them for a couple of years now. So we're going to have to see a big change in some clubs coming up very soon.
First off, definitely excited the schedule's coming out tomorrow on Monday. That is just going to be great, good times. So glad that baseball is finally back. Even if we can't be there, you know, at least it's something to watch on TV. It's sports. Secondly, yeah, I'm kind of bummed to see these players opting out, but I understand it. It would have been nice to see Price on a pitching rotation with Kershaw. I mean, that would have been really cool to see out there in LA, but they got to do what's best for them and their families. And if they can't take the risk for 3 months being around the disease, I completely understand that.
Yeah, I would like to say we'll eat a crow, because we did last week release the podcast, and then literally like the day after they released that the schedule was coming out, or they were going to have a season, when we all predicted, we were kind of like, it's probably not going to happen. So we were wrong about that. I will say that we were wrong. However, in our defense, they did make it seem very dire. Like they were very close to not having any season at all. But, you know, for the commissioner to just be like, well, okay, we'll have a season. You know, after all, it's out of nowhere. And just like everybody's fine with it and on board now. All of a sudden, it's like, okay. It made it sound pretty dire. But, yes, we will eat that crow. We were wrong about that. But glad to have baseball coming up this season. Now, let's hop into our next topic, guys. The Washington Redskins are going to change their name. You know, it started when a lot of, obviously with all of the activism that's been going on, you know, there are a lot of things that are changing in this country. A lot of intolerance is not being tolerated anymore. And of course, with that comes some semantics and some name changes. So the Washington Redskins, the Redskins is considered by most a slur towards Native Americans. And, there's been some, I believe it's sponsors and partners with the Redskins that have decided to pull out unless the name is changed. And the team responded quickly, like they should. And they've announced that they will heavily consider, which probably means they're going to change it. They're going to change the name. So there have been some names that have been flying around lately. Let's talk about some of those names. So one like the Red Tails. So the Red Tails, of course, is based off of the Tuskegee Airmen. That was a nickname that was given to the Tuskegee Airmen. I'm sorry, the name was tripping me up. They were, of course, World War II fighter pilots. They were an all African-American regiment of the Air Force, very famous for their heroic missions that they did during World War II. I think that would be a phenomenal tribute to them, as well as, especially being in Washington, D.C. with the history that's there. That's another great one. The Senators. I don't like that one as much, personally.
That one's okay.
That one's all right. I don't think that we need to give any more props to senators or congressmen. I think we should keep it as far away from government as possible. The Warriors, that was one that I was thinking of, actually, when I heard that they were going to change the name. I've heard there are some mixed opinions on this one, just due to it having I guess it's more of a stereotype that the Indians were, they were all warriors, and it really just, it panders to more of the male narrative or the warrior culture narrative of Native Americans. And there's so much more to them, of course, than in their history than just, warriors. So there's that concept. The Generals, it's all right. The Red Hawks, that one's okay too.
One sounds cooler.
It's cooler. We already have a lot of birds in the NFL, so
True.
I mean,
but no pigs.
Don't have pigs. But also, who wants to play for, like
the
who wants
Washington
to play for that?
Hogs?
I hate that.
Sign me up right now. I'm buying that shirt. The Washington Hogs.
I will say, like the Razorbacks, that's a cool name, right?
Yeah.
The Razorbacks is cool. But when you see the animal that it's based off of, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
So it's basically just like a glorified pig. Like, it's a cool name,
It's true.
Yeah. I don't know. Personally, it's not an animal that I'm going to represent. So I'm out on that one. But I'm going to throw my own into the hat. I think it should be the Washington Smithsonian Natural Museum of History. That's the one I'm sticking with. So,
there we go.
All right, yeah.
I think that could fit pretty well in the helmet.
Let's go.
But
definitely.
What about you guys? What are you thinking?
Goopy, you go ahead. I'll defer.
Oh, well, I love the name Red Tails, but for me personally, I believe that name should be reserved for the first professional team to come to Alabama. They were the Tuskegee Airmen. They are based in Alabama, and to me personally, I would love to see the Birmingham Red Tails rather than the Washington Red Tails. Your Smithsonian, great choice. You could have Larry Daly as the logo or the mascot, because a great movie that was. But I kind of like the Washington Senators as well. That's an old-timey baseball name. They were the team that the guy in Damn Yankees played for when he wanted to beat the Yankees. A great classic music. Washington Senators.
Well, definitely, I think the Red Tails is definitely a really good one. Plus, for the Washington organization right now, it kind of flips the entire narrative on its head. First, you go from a really discriminatory name that has been now, and you're fully changing the narrative, going with a pro African-American name, a pro everyone name, which would be awesome. But plus, it would be cool to see my lifelong dream of a real Falco jersey with a Nike check on it with Sentinels would be beautiful as well. So we'll just have to see what these guys come up with, I guess.
I like the Sentinels. That's a good one. I hadn't heard of that before. I think that's a really good that's a good option. I'm with you guys though. I think the Red Tails. I think that would be the perfect statement with what's going on. I don't know. Only thing I guess that holds me back from it is if they want to flip the narrative to make up for the racial slur against Native Americans. I don't know if they want to do something that kind of glorifies the Native Americans and kind of flips that on its head. I don't know if they care, but I don't know. I know whatever they're going to do, it's going to be a better name than what they currently have. I mean, there's there is some things that need to be changed, of course. So, it's going to be very interesting to see what they do with that name change. But moving on from that, we're going to get into our talk about HBCUs. So, of course, HBCU stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. And here's what's been going on with them right now. So in the BLM movement, there's been some discussions about young college basketball players or high school recruits going into college basketball that might start to choose historically black colleges and universities rather than PWIs, which of course is predominantly white institutions. And so this past Friday, that actually happened. So Makur Maker is the brother of Detroit Pistons Thon Maker, committed to Howard University, an HBCU, and over schools. He had offers from Kentucky, UCLA, and Duke, which of course all blue blood basketball programs. And he hasn't been the only one who's been talking about this. Mikey Williams, 2023 5-star recruit, he gave hints that he was wanting to commit to an HBCU later down the line. And this is huge. I mean, this hasn't happened really at all, since we started doing the star system, and since since college basketball has just grown to the forefront. I mean, they all go to the likes of Kentucky and UCLA and Duke and Louisville and all these other schools that are considered, top basketball programs, or they go straight to the NBA, right? That's what 5-stars do. But for this new kind of movement, this ideal, this is trailblazing. And I'm going to defer. I have some thoughts on kind of the effectiveness of what this will do to HBCUs, but let me hear your guys' thoughts.
Oh, well, I think it's going to be huge if it continues to grow. Obviously, if it's just one or two athletes deciding to do this, we might see some Cinderella story atmospheres, but we will not see HBCUs become one of those blue blood programs. But I think it's going to be huge for the future of all of college basketball and HBCU sports. With major level talents like this deciding to represent their community at an HBCU, and it will empower the next generation of athletes that are coming out right now to kind of level the playing field out a little bit. We've seen, as we know, we call them blue bloods for a reason. They've been around for a long time, and they've been dominant in their categories for many years. But this will be able to flip the entire narrative and even out the playing field. And it'll also be able to gain more exposure for HBCUs and help generate a ton of extra revenue for those schools to help them to continue to grow and continue to empower the next generation as well.
Yeah, it would be great to see HBCUs and not use the word Cinderella in the same sentence anymore. It would just be so awesome to say, oh, it's Kentucky versus Howard in the basketball championship again. Mm-hmm. It's the Alabama and Clemson of college basketball, Duke and Howard. That would be awesome, but I think we're about a decade away from that. I think these two guys, one already committing to Howard and Mikey Williams, the other, saying he's looking at HBCUs. I think that's a great step forward, a positive step, but we're still about 10 years away before we take out the Cinderella and start using blue bloods with those programs, which would just be great for the sport of basketball.
Yeah, I gotta say I love this sentiment. I really do. I want this to work. I don't think it will, however, and I don't even think that there's a time frame where this will work. Like within 10 years, I think that this isn't something that the recruits or the HBCUs can change. it actually, to me, more involves the NBA and the G League. And I'll kind of go into that, why I think that. So, most of those high-level recruits, if they are going to go somewhere, like we said, it's going to be to a blue blood, or they're going to go straight to the NBA or the G League. And I know that most players are not going to, they're not going to like pick going to an HBCU for 3 or 4 years, let alone 1, if they can go straight to the NBA or the G League, right? And they can earn money right away, and they can probably make a career, and then they can go back to college if they wanted to. And, to make an impact, you can't just be there for 1 year. You're going to have to change the culture while you're there, right? You're going to have to be there for at least 3 to 4 years, and you're going to have to get some guys on your team that can start to, you need a new generation of recruits. If you're a big 5-star recruit and you're tearing it up at an HBCU, and you're going to have guys behind you that you help recruit that come to that HBCU, then they can recruit guys behind them. That's how you change the culture, right? But for a guy to go there for 1 year, he's not going to change much. I could give you 2 examples just in the last year. I'll give you James Wiseman and Anthony Edwards, right? I mean, Memphis it's a better basketball program, but it's not, it's not really considered a blue blood. It might be on the rise. But Wiseman was there for a year, and he's gone now, and they might have had increased revenues and more TV deals for a year, but they won't have it now. And Anthony Edwards was there for 1 year. They might have had increased, or at Georgia for 1 year, they might have had increased ticket sales and increased, viewership on the SEC network, but he's gone now too. He's going to be in the NBA. So it's like, you didn't change the culture, you changed 1 season. And I think that that's kind of how that translates to the HBCU. What you really want is for the NBA or the G League to change the rule where you can't just go straight to the NBA. You have to be in school for 3 to 4 years, like CFB. And that's how you're going to change the culture of the colleges, because if you have that rule that lets them create that culture rather than just jumping ahead, it's not just a quick social statement, it's a culture change, right? And I want that to happen. So I think that the sentiment may be misplaced. It may be better if you hype up the HBCUs, but put pressure on the NBA to put more emphasis on getting your education for 3 to 4 years, changing the culture, putting more emphasis on going to an HBCU to earn your education and get better at basketball, and then hop to the NBA. Personally, I think that's the better road for it. But what do you guys think about that take there?
I love it. I would love to see the NBA try to work with these kids a little bit more education, because that's the beauty of college football. Most guys, even though they only stay 3 years, they only have to make up that 1 more year. They have to go back and get that degree. With NCAA basketball, you're talking about guys pretty much not caring for 2/3 of the year. We see a lot. They pay attention during basketball season to be able to play, and then they get on out of there, and they didn't really even learn anything. But my only problem with forcing kids to stay longer in college is I feel like you're going to lose them to overseas play where they can make money out of the gate. They can play against a high level of talent and then come to the draft and go number 1 overall and get even more money, as we're going to see with LaMelo Ball coming up this year. So that's my only problem with having kids stay longer.
I love the idea of putting pressure on the NBA to start drafting from HBCU. Now, I think, why stop there? Let's put pressure on the NFL and the MLB, and heck, maybe even the NHL. Let's put the pressure on these big leagues to start going to these HBCUs to show, hey, you can be drafted if you go here too. And let's build up the hype around those programs so that we can get a Grambling State versus Southern game to be as big as the Iron Bowl. That's where the future needs to be. So let's start with the NBA, but, let's start pushing the NFL. Hey, go draft these guys. They are just as good, and they will get better if we start showing that you can make it to the league from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, guys, all great points. And I think that line of thinking is well placed. And I also, I applaud those recruits for kind of pushing that. I think that the movement it might need to be shaped a little bit. It might need to be, there might need to be some pieces that are kind of shifted around for a a better movement to take place, I guess. Well, we are going to be moving on from that, and we're going to jump into our final segment as well as the final round. The final round of the NCAA football greatest all-time team debate. We have our final poll out of the way. Our second to final poll out of the way. The top two teams that made it to the final round are the 2005 Texas Longhorns and the 2019 LSU Tigers. I am not surprised by one of these. I'm very surprised by the other. I think you know which one I'm talking about. I didn't think that the Texas Longhorns would be here this late into the game, but here they are. Coop shaking his head because, of course, the 2008 Florida Gators were kicked out of this round by a very slim margin. It actually came down to a tie, and we, amongst ourselves, decided to be the tiebreakers, and we figured out that the Longhorns should move on. Now, let's go over some of these talking points here, and I'll go ahead and give LSU. Dylan, I know you've got that rigor for Texas. If you'd like to give your Texas points, we'll give those real quick, and then of course we will defer it to the vote. We'll see what our viewers want to say in terms of what they hear, what they know, and it's going to come down to the vote come this week, right? I personally kind of think I know how it's going to end up. I think that if it came to that slim of a margin for Texas, they kind of have an uphill battle, and it's going to be a Cinderella story if they can win it. But I think LSU is going to come out on top.
All I'm going to say is it was a Cinderella story in 2005 as well.
That's true.
That is true. How that ended. So let's jump right in.
That's a good point. All right, first up, LSU. I will defer to Texas so I can let you get the last say, so you can really make your case, leave viewers with a strong note, right?
Okay.
So LSU, right? This last year, I think it's all fresh in our minds. We've gone over these points several times, but we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the awards. The awards is the most impressive part of this year, I would say. 15-0 national champions, of course, beat 7 top 10 teams in one season. Single season FBS offensive scoring record for a single season. And then the individual awards, Joe Burrow, Heisman winner, Maxwell winner, Unitas winner, Walter Camp winner, and several other awards that are on the smaller end of the chain. The single season FBS passing touchdown record, as well as the combined touchdowns record, the single season SEC passing yards record, the third all-time FBS passing yards record for a single season. And then, of course, Jamar Chase, the Biletnikoff Award winner, Grant Delpit, Jim Thorpe Award winner, which he didn't deserve. O-Line Moore Award went to LSU's offensive line. And then the worst attribute was letting up 38 points to Vanderbilt in the winning effort. So what? All right, everybody has a bad game, right? But, I mean, this is one of the most dominant teams I've ever seen. Joe Burrow had the best year an SEC quarterback has ever had, and quite possibly an FBS quarterback has ever had in an entire season. He threw, 8 touchdowns? It was 7 or 8 touchdowns? It's either 7 or 8 touchdowns against Oklahoma. I
believe it was 8. I believe he broke the
8.
record.
I think you're right, 8.
Yeah.
Basically, every single record that Deshaun Watson set in his time in the playoff for total yards between 2 playoff games, total yards in 1 playoff game, total touchdowns, everything. He shattered it by several touchdowns and several hundred yards. I mean, this guy had the best year we've ever seen as a college quarterback, right? And he was on this team, an undefeated team. The team was almost perfect. I mean, it was almost perfect. That's all I got to say. It was literally almost a perfect year. And I don't know what else to say. I mean, it was that impressive. It was almost immaculate. I couldn't believe it while I was watching it. They seemed unbeatable. They seemed the strongest team that I've ever seen take the field up to this point. That is my case. I will hand it over to Texas.
All right. First off, I will say, ironically, I think that the 2005 Texas team in a way has a lot of similarities to the 2019 LSU Tiger team. Because at the time, Texas set the record for most points in a season, the most scoring points in a season, with over 682 points scored in the 2005 season. You had a absolutely dominant quarterback at the helm in Vince Young. He had over 3,000 passing yards, 26 passing TDs, but also ran for over 1,000 yards and scored 12 rushing TDs at the same time. The ultimate dual threat quarterback, I think, in college football history, maybe next to those of the likes of Kyler Murray and or Michael Vick at the same time. But 14-0 national champs beat 4 top 10 teams, which at the time with scheduling, that was extremely hard to do. Just like LSU right now with scheduling, that is very tough to do, to beat that many top 10 teams as well. And they averaged 512 yards per game and 50 points per game, which at the time in 2005, unheard of, absolutely unheard of, and defeated maybe one of the most dominant dynasties in all of college football history, the famous USC Trojans, led by multiple quarterbacks. We all know the Reggie Bush story, who won 34 games in a row and was on their way to winning a three-peat in college football at the time, which was absolutely immaculate. And their worst attribute was only giving up 29 to Texas A&M in the middle of the regular season. So I think these teams are honestly, in a lot of ways, for the time periods, very similar if we look at them in side-by-side comparison. But in all honesty, I'm going to leave it up to the fans to see how we end up here.
It's what we got to do. That's all we can say. That's all we can say. Coop, anything to add on those two?
I have a concession speech for last week.
Fair.
Hard-fought battle.
Fair.
It was 50-50 on the Twitter poll, and it was 1 point that decided Texas and Florida. That 1 point being a loss to Ole Miss for the 2008 Florida team.
Yes.
Don't worry, they'll be back next year when we have our debate again, counting in the 2020 season. They'll be back. And I promise you'll never see a team work harder to establish their legacy more than they established their legacy this season. That said, this is a great matchup. I can't wait to see what the fans say. I know who I'm voting for. I hope you know who you're voting for, and we will crown a winner next Sunday.
I got to say, I should have seen that coming. I should have seen that the promise, fit in there somewhere. I should have known that was going to happen.
Yes.
We appreciate your
sir.
consolation. Thank you, Coop.
Yes.
Yeah, it is now up to the viewers on Twitter. We're going to figure this thing out, and we will announce the winner come next week. And before we go, speaking of next week, we just wanted to announce that we have updated our weekly regimen. So we are now releasing podcasts on Sunday nights, and then we will have a week break, and then we'll do every Sunday. That just has to do with scheduling. Our lives have kind of been changing. We've been getting jobs, and work has come back into the picture, thank God. So we're going to be releasing those podcasts, but they will not drop in quality, and we will be releasing the same great content to you come Sunday nights. And they will now be found on YouTube and Spotify instead of SoundCloud. So YouTube and Spotify, that's where you can find us, the Student Section Summer League podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening/watching. And we will see you next week.